Hingað er komin Michael Hudson, hann prófessor frá Bandaríkjunum, var ráðgjafi á Wall Street. Ég ætla að taka fram að þetta viðtal sem sagt ekki með texta, en það verður textað og sett á netið með texta fljótt á eftir og verður líka textað í endursýningu þáttarins í kvöld. Þannig að þeir sem ekki skilja allt, þeir geta notið þess. Michael, welcome to Silfur Egils. You wrote an article in Fréttablaðið yesterday. You said that Iceland was under attack. Is Iceland under attack, and by whom?
Well, it's under financial attack, not military attack. And the objective is exactly the same. The objective is to get control of your resources, your natural resources, your money. And it's as if paying foreign debt is very much like paying foreign tribute. But without the cost of a military overhead or an occupation. The difference is that a country may not realize it's under attack. It may think it's at peace. It may think this is the normal way of doing business. But what's happened to Iceland in the last 10 years is not the normal way of doing business at all. And the European community and international banks have acted in a predatory way towards Iceland. They have tried to extract as much revenue as they can, and they found out that doing it financially is the easiest way to get control of a country, much easier than the cost of military invasion, in which case people really fight back. But Iceland hasn't been fighting back against the financial attack.
But you say that Iceland should fight back.
Well, I think it's right for any country to get control of its resources. No country should let itself essentially be looted. Every country should try to use the financial system to grow and to raise the living standards. And instead, there's no way that living standards can rise now. There's no way that Iceland can go forward when it has to pay this heavy tribute of interest and debts that are way, way beyond its ability to pay.
So in your view, what happened in Iceland in the last years?
They fell for they believed that neoliberal economics, which is really pro-financial economics, they believed that the way to get rich was to run into debt. And no country in history has ever believed that. Everyone's always tried to stay out of debt, and Iceland thought that if it could borrow and run into debt and somehow hope that it could use this to invest in assets that would go up in price, it would come out ahead. And so it bet the whole country. And any textbook on how to manage an economy or how to manage a company starts. The very first rule is never take a risk that puts the whole company at risk of loss. And they took a risk that violates every economic textbook.
And who did this?
I don't know, because I'm not here in Iceland. Obviously, the Icelandic bankers did. The people in charge of committing Iceland to pay foreign debts made the decision to pay without any calculation of how they were ever going to pay. I don't believe that anyone could have looked at Iceland's situation and said, if things go wrong, here's how we're going to pay. We're going to have to sell off all of our natural resources. Half the homeowners are going to have to lose their homes, and the creditors are going to have to end up with all the assets, and we lose everything. I don't think anybody made that calculation.
No. But do you think that Iceland should not pay its debts?
Well, the good news is what Adam Smith said many years ago. No country in history ever has paid its debts. So it's inevitable that the debts won't be paid. I don't think they should be paid, but the starting point is that they can't be paid. There's simply no way that these debts can be paid off. And so the question is, how are they not going to be paid? And there are two ways. Either they can stretch out, they can fail to realize they can't be paid. You'll stretch it out as long as possible, which is what the creditors want, until you've already sold off your natural resources. You've already privatized your public domain and sold it off. You've already foreclosed on homes. And then at the very end of losing everything, then you realize you can't pay. Or at the very beginning, you make a calculation and say to the creditors who owe your money, tell us how we're supposed to pay. under the normal course of doing business. And it'll be very clear that they can't pay. Now, the creditors are trying to pressure Iceland very quickly. They're like a high-pressure salesman.
Yeah.
They're saying, make a decision quickly that you're going to pay us, and then they stretch it out. So they're saying, make it quickly before you calculate how much you owe, before you calculate what the cost of paying will be, and most of all, before you ask the banks whether they've behaved in a crooked, immoral, and actually illegal way.
But you said that the system is a paradise for the creditors. It's
for the short term, it is.
You know,
it is.
It favors the creditors.
Well, and that's what's unique about Iceland. Usually, in every business cycle, there's a build-up, and then there's a crash, and the advantage of the crash is it wipes out the bad debts, and the business upswing can take place once the economy is free of debts. But in this case, Iceland is not being free of debts, and in fact, it can't even inflate its way out of debt because you have the debts indexed to the rate of inflation, but not wages. So there's a debt squeeze, and that's called debt deflation. The normal circular flow between production and consumption is being interrupted by creditors taking out, extracting so much money that the economy shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. And that's why the debts can't be paid. Shrinking doesn't help you pay the debts. It makes you even more dependent. So the kind of austerity program that the International Monetary Fund is telling Iceland to do to pay won't work. It's going to make things worse and worse.
So the IMF is giving us the wrong advice.
That's their job. That's what they've been doing for the last 50 years.
But they're basically running the country. No.
What?
They are basically running the country now.
Yes, that's because they believe in a free market. And a free market believes in centralized planning, total control, but not by democratically elected people. The planning, it moves out of the hands of democratically elected government into the hands of bankers, mainly foreign bankers. So the government, in effect, has been turned over to the foreign bankers to run Iceland for their benefit, not for the benefit of the people. And that goes against every democratic tradition of Western Europe.
Should we kick out the IMF then?
Not only kick it out, but I'd say withdraw from it. Look at what they've done to Latin America. Look at the history of what they've done to every single country. Last Thursday in the Ukraine, there was a riot in Parliament when the Eastern Ukraine, the party of the regions, said we're not going to submit to economic shrinkage. The IMF tells us to raise the unemployment rate, lower the wages, and if we do that, people are going to vote to join Russia again. And there was a riot, and they refused to join the IMF. A year ago, the IMF did not have a single customer left in the world once Turkey paid its loans. No country in the world wanted to submit to shrinkage, to lower wages, to higher taxes, and higher payment to foreigners. Everyone rejected it. So when the G20 meetings last week gave $1 trillion for the IMF, that's saying the creditor nations in Europe is saying to the debtor countries, drop dead.
But will we not become a pariah state if we don't pay our loans?
No, Argentina didn't pay its loans, and now it's borrowing again. You'll only become a pariah state if you do pay your loans, because then you'll be too broke ever to get any more credit. When you owe more than you can pay, that's called negative equity. Nobody's going to lend to you. Nobody's going to sell to you when you owe more than you can pay. So right now, you're in a pariah state. You kick out the IMF so that you won't be a pariah.
But what about the general public with their houses and their mortgages and the loans they can't pay? Are you in favor of debt relief for
Of course there has to be debt relief. In the United States, for instance, 2 weeks ago, President Obama and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation that insures the banks had a rule. They said, they told the banks, renegotiate all of the loans so that the cost of carrying your house does not exceed 32% of your income. And they calculated that people maybe can pay 32% of their income in the United States for their mortgage and carrying charges and taxes, but more than that, they shouldn't pay. Certainly there has to be a limit, and you have to bring the debts down to the ability to pay. That's what always happens one way or another.
But in Iceland, we also have this system of indexation of loans.
That means that people have to probably pay much more than 32% of their income. And if that's the case, then property prices are going to plunge. People can't pay. There are going to be defaults, just as they are in America.
Yeah.
10 million families are expected to lose their homes in America. Look at what this is going to do politically. This will tear society apart, and it will prevent Iceland from being the kind of egalitarian middle-class society that it is now. Do you want to end up like a banana republic?
What do you think about this indexation of the loans?
It's terrible. It's absolutely ridiculous. The creditors are supposed to lose when they made a bad loan. If credit is a public utility, and if a creditor makes a loan that can't be paid, the creditor has a responsibility, not just the debtor. I can't imagine how the banks have been able to blame the victim here and convince the mortgage debtors that somehow it's all their fault for something that they didn't cause. They didn't cause the problem.
No. But they are going to pay for it.
Yes, and most democratically elected countries say we're not going to do it. And that's why the post-Soviet countries are in exactly the same position. Latvia and the Baltic states, Hungary, none of these countries are paying. The biggest debtor in the world is the United States, and it owes $4 trillion to foreign central banks. Just central banks alone. It's running a chronic trade deficit, it's running a heavy military deficit, and its companies are buying foreign countries. And what is Obama doing? He's not imposing an IMF austerity program. No. He's doing a Keynesian expansion to recover the economy. I think Iceland should do just what America's doing.
You have cited Babylonia as an example of how to work things out.
For 3,000 years, all of the Near Eastern countries, Sumer, Babylonia, Israel, and the surrounding territories, whenever a new ruler would come into office, the first thing the ruler would do would be to declare a clean slate. And the clean slate was canceling the debts, freeing the debt servants who'd been reduced to bondage, and returning the lands to people who'd lost it. And it happens that this is exactly the same rule that appears in the Bible, in Leviticus, under the Jubilee year. And even the Hebrew word for the Jubilee year, Duror, is a Babylonian word, Andurarim. And these laws go back from 2400 BC all the way down to the Persian period, all the way down to the time of Jesus. And the first sermon that Jesus ever gave when he stepped into the synagogue was to unroll the scroll to Isaiah and say, I have come to proclaim the year of the Lord, the Jubilee, and cancel the debts. And that was the original program of Christianity.
Yes. But what about this global system that seems to be coming down all around us? A system of virtual wealth.
Virtual wealth is a claim. It means people think that when you have a bond or a stock, that's wealth. But what that is a claim on the physical wealth. It's not the kind of wealth of nations that Adam Smith was talking about. When the system's coming down, all the creditors can do is try to grab as much as they can, as fast as they can. And the way to do that is to confuse the issue, to tell people to pound on the table and say a debt is a debt, don't you want to pay? And to try to make the debtor feel guilty. And the debtor shouldn't feel guilty. It's the creditor should feel guilty because they have been violating really most of the international and the kind of laws we have in the United States.
Yeah, but do you think this system can or should be salvaged? This economy, this virtual economy?
No virtual economy ever has been salvaged. So history answers that. Quite apart from whether it should or not, it can't be. When the debts exceed the ability to pay, they can't be paid. So the basic principle is that a debt that can't be paid won't be. And then you talk about, is that moral or not? Well, it's inevitable, and the fact is that debts tend to grow by the magic of compound interest. The magic of compound interest means it grows exponentially, and economies grow in S-curves. So every economy tends to have its debts grow faster. That's why the business cycle comes to an end. It gets over-indebted, interest rates rise, that stops new investment, and without new investment, there's less employment, and the economy grinds to a halt. a well-managed economy, like a democracy like Iceland, should say, we don't want that to happen. It's time to wipe out the debt overhead, like every other economy's done for the last few hundred years, and start over again with a clean slate.
With the real economy.
Yes, the real economy
of
production and consumption. That's the economy that Adam Smith and John Stuart Mill and all the classical economists talked about.
But the bankers are being bailed out, for
by
example,
the government.
Yeah,
it's amazing, by the government.
They're pumping billions of dollars into the banks.
And nothing for debt relief. That's the amazing thing. So when the G20 said, we're going to give $1 trillion to the IMF, there's nothing to give to the debtors. Only to the creditors to say, you've made bad loans, we're going to bail you out, you lend this money to the government, let the government pay the banks. So now the government can tax the people, can increase the taxes heavily by a huge amount, and repay the bankers for their bad loans. That means Iceland will not be able to import very much. It will have to cut its imports in half. Living standards here will have to fall by about half to pay. People should be told that if they try to pay these debts, not only can they not, they're going to fall further and further behind in paying their debts, but their living standards have to go down and they'll lose their property.
You have used a word I am quite fond of these days. It's the word oligarchy. Have we been living in an oligarchy?
Well, an oligarchy is emerging all over the world. We're seeing everybody a century ago thought that once you gave people the ability to vote, they'd vote in their self-interest. And in fact, the wealthy people have had their own chess game to play in this, and they found that by giving money to political campaigns, the politicians believe that the more money they have to pay for television and the media, that's what makes the votes. And yes, there's an oligarchy. I'll give you an example. 10 years ago in the United States, the wealthiest 1% of the population owned 37% of the returns to wealth. 1% on 37%. That's interest, dividends, and capital gains. 5 years ago, they'd increased their share to 57%. And today, the richest 1% in America owns 2/3 of all of the revenue to wealth. That's an oligarchy. Never in American statistics have things been so unequal. So instead of the trend making people more and more equal, as everybody expected a century ago, it's becoming more and more unequal. And in America, real wages haven't gone up in 30 years. They've actually been going down, and people have kept their standard of living by going further and further into debt. And what we're seeing is, if anything, a rollback of the progress of the last century into, you can call it debt peonage, you can call it neo-feudalism, but the democracy is turning into an oligarchy. And Aristotle said that, what is oligarchy? It's the last stage of democracy. And then an oligarchy turns into an aristocracy by making it self-hereditary. And then the aristocracy fights among itself, and some people some leaders take the people into their hand. And so you have an eternal triangle between democracy, oligarchy, aristocracy, and that's what you're seeing today, the transition from democracy to oligarchy.
Michael Hudson, thank you very much for being on the program. You will be speaking at 2 meetings tomorrow, I know, in Reykjavik.
Yes.
And við fáum, þetta verður textað hér setta í kvöld og á vefnum við fáum hérna rétt á eftir John Perkins.